Hi, and welcome to this Gadget Talk video, where we're going to be talking about the Choyong LC90 portable radio. As you can see, I'm up here in northern Arizona at one of my favorite campgrounds, and I picked this spot because one of the things I really like to do when I'm out camping is just hang around with a soda or an adult beverage and listen to radio. And this little LC90 radio provided by Choyong is a really good way to spend some time when you're out camping. Of course, it'll work well in your office or in your study as well. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the radio. One of the things that's really interesting about this radio is that besides having the typical AM and FM radio bands, it also has the full range of shortwave bands, and as you'd expect with a radio in this price point, it has upper and lower sideband ability as well. Additionally, it's what I would call a hybrid radio. And what I mean by that, not only does it have these multiple airwave bands, but it's also an internet radio, which means you've got thousands, if not tens of thousands, of internet radio stations from around the world to provide you with your entertainment. There are a couple of things I really like about this radio. One of the things is that Choyong upgrades firmware based on feedback from the users. Now, I looked at some reviews from a couple of years ago, as this is not a brand new radio, and I found that there were some complaints. As I worked with this one, I noticed that the firmware was a couple of upgrades further along, and that those complaints had been addressed in large part. Now, is it a perfect radio? Of course not, but many of the things that people pointed out have been improved. One of the things is that they changed the AI search agent from something else to ChatGPT. And so now when you're using the internet radio portion of this hybrid radio, you can speak to the radio and ChatGPT will do the search for podcasts, for news, and for music to meet whatever desire that you might have. Now, it still has things that you can search through and lists and that kind of thing, but I found that the ChatGPT portion of this does a really fine job of identifying things I wanted to look for. And I've got a clip of that here coming up as we go through the power on turn of the radio. So let's take a look at what comes in the radio, this LC90 from Choyong. So here's what comes in the box, the Choyong LC90. We'll take the lid off it here. And so you can see the radio comes packaged in foam. It's really a nice box. Came through the shipping process without any trouble. And so that's the radio. We'll look at that in just a second. Comes with a little owner's guide that basically talks about all of the buttons that we're going to look at here on the radio, along with a diagram of those buttons. There's a USB-C charging cable. It's got a purple inset, so I'm not sure. I think that's just proprietary and it's probably just charging. I haven't found a reason to record or transfer data to it yet. And then a wrist strap, and it's got a little elasticity to it. The radio is a little big for a wrist strap in my opinion, but if you like wrist straps, there's one right there. Now let's take a closer look at the radio. So here's the radio, and we'll just do a quick overview of the buttons, and then we'll power it on and check that out here in a couple of minutes. But we've got a large speaker area. It looks like there's a couple of indents there, which leads me to believe that there's maybe a couple of speakers hiding under there, you know, kind of mid-range and tweeter, if you will. But regardless, I was playing with this last night and it has a very good sound to it. So across the top, we've got some management buttons. We've got a lock, an alarm, we've got a settings button, and then we have here, I think, a timer button. And then we can set favorites for a lot of the channels that we stumble across that we want to remember in any of the bands that we have. These three are our band select switches here. FM will get you, obviously, broadcast FM. MW will get you medium wave, that's AM here in the United States. Another press on the medium wave button will get you long wave down at the 156 kilohertz range. I've never stumbled across any long wave transmissions here in the United States, but I suspect that in other parts of the world they may be available. The shortwave here will take us into shortwave, and then another button press will move us into upper sideband and lower sideband. So the radio does have the single sideband abilities here, as you'd expect with a radio that comes in this price range. We can also turn our Bluetooth on if we want to control a Bluetooth speaker, and then TF will move us into the TF, or what we normally in the United States refer to as a micro SD card. More on that in just a second. Over here we've got some control buttons here. One here is this OK, that'll respond to a menu, and then these three will direct us to some of the parts of this, what I would call a hybrid radio, because the radio is not only these bands up here, but it is also an internet radio. So with a SIM card and with Wi-Fi, you can go to the internet and play any of the tens of thousands of internet radio stations. And I was listening to a podcast last night, and this sounded really good, really good. So music, podcasts, and news. So the tag button there, you can press, and you've got a little microphone right there. You can speak to the radio, and it'll use ChatGPT as an AI agent to find those internet stations. We'll talk more about that in a minute. We'll get you into language with this button here, and into the menu there with that button, along with the keys that will allow you to key in frequencies directly, as opposed to what we have on this side. Besides the power button here, we've got tuning at the broad scale here, and then we've got fine tuning here, and then over here we've got volume control. Now, since we're looking at those side things, let's take a look at that. So here we've got the Type-C connector for charging, and then right there we have a connector for a 3.5 millimeter mono plug that would plug in for a antenna. And so if you have an adapter or one of those real type antennas that you can sometimes get for a couple of bucks that just has, 10 or 12 feet of wire connector, you can connect it right to the radio, as opposed to clipping on a little alligator clip to the end of the telescopic antenna that's there on the top. And then down here, there's another 3.5 millimeter plug for some headphones, if you have some wired headphones you want to use. Now, speaking of the antenna, it's right here, and it comes up, it extends to about 3 feet, 38, 39 inches or so. And I found this for a radio with a telescopic antenna that this thing worked really well. I had looking for some shortwave stations last night, just after sundown. And of course, band conditions have something to do with this, but I was able to pick up a number of ham radio operators doing parks on the air, and a couple other guys just out there rag chewing on both 20 and 15 meters. So I was really pleasantly surprised with what I could receive with this radio just using that standard built-in antenna. Now, on the bottom, we've got also a couple of things in here. You can put in a SIM card. And so if you have a SIM card similar to what you might find in a push-to-talk over cellular walkie-talkie, for example, you could slide that in there, and you could use a 4G network to access your internet radio that way. And then here we've got a TF card, or the micro SD card. You see I have one in there, and that has really two purposes. You need one in there to do firmware updates. The radio is firmware upgradable. It will check with one of the menu items that we'll see in a minute if it has the latest firmware, and if it doesn't, you can download it. It downloads to the TF card and then installs from the TF card. And then you can also use the TF card if you have a bunch of music stored at home. You can just pop it in there and then use the TF card button here on the front to manage your music collection that's stored there on that little micro SD card. On this side, there's nothing, and on the back, besides access to the battery, you can have the receive information. So, the FM stations, medium wave, short wave. Again, it doesn't list long wave, but it's accessible down there. And then you can see that there's two 18650 batteries here behind this cover that power the thing, and the input's 5 volts, so the typical USB input with the model number of the LC90. So that's a quick overview of the radio. So now let's do a quick power on tour of the radio where we'll explore some of these buttons and functions and menus and so forth. So we're going to start by turning the radio on, pressing and holding, and the splash screen comes on. The radio boots up, and it comes on with the date and time. I'm here Friday afternoon doing this. Now, if we wanted to lock the radio, we can press this, and the keypad is locked. Press it again, and it will take it out. Here we can set up alarms, and we can tell it by working our way with this button here, and then you can make selection. This button will also push in, so that's how you can make your selections there with that. I can go to settings, and here I can set my eSIM, and I can go in. It looks like they've got an offer of some kind. I can select the SIM card. Here, again, I'll press it and choose the primary SIM card, and of course there's none in there right now, so we'll back out of that. Here we can go into Wi-Fi, and you can see I can look for my available Wi-Fi networks, and then when I get a network that I want selected, if it's encrypted, then I can pop on and use these knobs and selections to type in the password, and I've already done that using my Starlink that I have here when I'm out camping. So that's the Wi-Fi menu, and we'll back out of this, and then we can turn the backlight on. We can turn autoplay on. If you have it set for an alarm, when the alarm goes off, the radio will start playing. You can set the step for the FM, the medium wave step, and then it'll give you the IMEI and the MAC address for this device, along with version info. And so if we look here, I've got version 4.9.1, and then it tells me I'm using the latest version of the software. So for me, when manufacturers allow user upgradable firmware, that's a real big plus, because it keeps the item up to date as they add things, and if they've got a bug in their software, you're not just stuck with it forever. And as I've looked at some of the other reviews of this radio, some of those earlier versions of firmware had some shortcomings, and the company's been very responsive to fix those as they've gone forward. So we've got here in our settings, we'll back out of settings, and then here we can set up frequency, and we can go to our favorite stations, favorite podcasts. We can add stations, FM and AM, all of those things that we can set up for the various bands that we have. Notice that here it does show the long wave option as well as sideband for both positive and negative. So that's here in favorites. Now here, when we go into these, we're selecting our bands, and so we go in here, press, and now we've got FM. I'm going to extend this antenna. It's not my point here in the review to go and listen a lot. We'll finish up with some listening, but here we can see we've got the FM radio stations here. I want to go into medium wave. A short press gets me medium wave. That's the bottom end. And again, I can just use this. And then if I press again, notice it says medium wave here. Press again. Now I'm down in the long wave, so I'm getting into those really low kilohertz, and I can look for long wave stations if there happen to be any in your part of the country. So here I've moved into shortwave, and so I've got a shortwave channel, and then I can scroll here the way I do normally. This is AM shortwave, so if it just says SW, it's AM. And now if I push shortwave again, it goes to upper sideband, and now you notice I have some ability to tune more finely, and so I'm using that second knob, and I can go in here. So let's jump down to where I suspect I'm going to hear something. So here I've set in AM. This is the Colorado station that broadcasts time. So you can hear WWV there. There's some popping going on around here in the campsite. But, you know, generally these HFs are going to be better toward evening. And then, of course, while I have been impressed with this telescopic antenna, A long wire antenna is going to do better, and we'll see that when we start doing some specific recording a little bit later today.
1 minute, coordinated universal time.
And there was our minute for WWV. So let's go back up here to medium wave. We'll press that. This comes alive. And then it switches. And you can see that there's a lot of information here displayed on this. Now, let's also then move down here to these buttons. And so if we go here to music, it loads. You can see the screen is actually a color screen, but it doesn't have a lot of brightly colored blocks of text, just to keep things simple. But if we wanted to look at some of these, so if we wanted to go to the BBC, it takes a minute to load. And there's the BBC. If we tune it, we'll tune down to the next one. There's BBC number 2. It loads. And there's that music. Okay, and then we can go down to podcasts. And so we can search our favorites if we've set any. We can look at recently played. We can look at news, society, and culture. Let's see if we get anything pulled there. So there's various podcasts that we've got going here. So last night I was listening to the Tyrus talk to an astronaut from the ill-fated getting stuck in space incident that happened earlier this year. And so to do that, I press the tag, Planet Tyrus. It found Planet Tyrus, and it then took me to that podcast. And then if I were to press the button, then the various podcast editions that he's got are there. And so using the tag button to speak into the microphone, using that ChatGPT AI helper will allow you to find the podcasts and radio stations. Let's try something else. I'm going to go into the news category, and I'm going to press Ukraine news. And so here are podcasts and news stations that are out there streaming on the internet about the Russia and Ukraine war. So if I select it, it'll load.
Doorbell helps you track packages and see who's at your door.
Now these are ad supported, and so you're going to have to listen to about 90 seconds of ads before the podcast or the news show actually starts. But you can see, you can go all over, and the chat agent makes it really easy to access the kind of news and other information that you might want. So let's check the menu button here. So we can search various continents, areas of the world, various topics. All of that stuff is there where you can narrow your search. You know, if you like to listen to stories, there's one on storytelling and so forth. The internet radio stations are just too numerous to even describe very well. So that's it for the Power On Tour. Hopefully you've got a sense for how this works. So as we wrap this up, I'm going to say goodbye, but before I do, I want to cover a couple of little things that I found particularly useful here with this radio, and then we'll finish up with some audio clips from a variety of the bands. So if you're hanging with me, thanks. If you need to go, I understand. Otherwise, hang around for another minute or two to hear some of the reception that this radio provides to you. So one of the things I really liked was the ChatGPT search for internet radio stations. Now, I like to disconnect when I'm out camping, but not completely. So I've got a Starlink on the RV, and so I can use Wi-Fi to connect and make use of the full use of internet radio stations, and they sound really good. Shortwave sounds good too. even with the telescopic antenna, I was able to pull in some Parks on the Air ham activity, as well as some AM shortwave activity in the various bands where you find those kinds of stations. FM sounded really good. AM, not so much, but even in the instruction book, it says that its performance in the AM band is weaker than its performance in some of the other bands. So it's something they're aware of. It's just kind of a design in the engineering. And then I also like the ability to connect an external antenna using a 3.5 millimeter plug, whether it's just a real style or whether it's going out to a loop antenna hanging in a tree. That really makes a big difference in terms of your ability to receive, especially there in the shortwave band. So thanks for hanging with me. If you like the video, please click the thumbs up button and subscribe to the Gadget Talk channel. And stay with me as I play a couple of clips demonstrating the reception capability of the LC90. So long. Here's a couple of hams doing a rag chew and upper sideband.